Hello, listeners and viewers. It's now been over 6 weeks since 4-year-old Jack and his 6-year-old sister, Lilly Sullivan, were reported missing from their rural Nova Scotia home. As we detailed in the series of previous nighttime episodes, the children's mother and stepfather told police that when they awoke at about 10 a.m. on Friday, May 2nd, they found that Jack and Lilly were gone, with no signs of where they may have went or how they even left. Since then, the case has been teetering somewhere between a missing persons investigation and what seems to be a criminal investigation. And as expected, over the past week, the story has continued to evolve. There was a third and possibly final large-scale ground search in the area surrounding the children's home. There was a community-organized candlelight vigil for the children. There was yet another RCMP update on the status of the investigation. And the children's stepfather, Daniel Martell, has continued to share his inside details of the investigation and some behind-the-scenes information with the press. So let's get into it. In this episode of Nighttime, we'll discuss all the developments that played out during the 5th and 6th week of the search for Jack and Lilly Sullivan.
You are listening to the Nighttime Podcast.
You mentioned last time we chatted that you'd offered to do a polygraph test.
That is correct.
Has that already happened?
That has happened.
Right. And did you get results from that yet?
I do have results, and I don't know if I can share those results, but they were good in my favor, we'll say that.
Ms. Madelayne Klein, you're looking quite bright. I'm guessing summer has found its way to Regina, Saskatchewan?
Not as much as I'd like it to. But it's just my lighting. I don't tan. I turn a lobster red and then I go back to being fluorescent. So,
anything new in your life? Any news coming out of Regina? Other than I read that there was a hepatitis A scare at a McDonald's in Regina. Anything else going on over there?
Just hepatitis. That's nothing comes to mind. And that's the McDonald's like kind of by my house.
Oh no, that's horrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
you know what? I expect nothing less from Regina.
Okay, yeah.
Never surprised, always disappointed.
Let's get into it here. We got a lot to talk about. We didn't do an episode last week, so we kind of have 2 weeks to break down tonight. This will be our 6th episode in this series, mainly covering the 5th and 6th week of the search for Jack and Lilly. I cannot believe that it's well past a month. Again, we're into the 6th week. The story continues to twist, turn, and unravel in every direction, and the online discussion and discourse is as feverish as it has ever been. I say this at the beginning of every episode, but I'm shocked that this has gone on this long because the amount of attention, I can't imagine the RCMP is doing everything they can to put an end to this, but they haven't found it yet.
But at the end of our last episode, I asked you, like, how much longer do you think this might go on? And you said 2 weeks. So if you're correct, this coming up week is the week that we're going to get some sort of answer. So you're very rarely wrong. So I'm holding on to that.
Okay, I would like to re-estimate because based on all the developments this week, I think we still got some time left in this story. I'm certainly not a psychic, so don't put much stock in my prediction. Every week that we've talked, if you had asked me that, I'd say this has to end within the next week. I kind of feel that way now, but some of the developments we have tonight will show that there's much more to this story than maybe we thought. But let's just start by picking up right where we left off during our last episode. When we last talked, the final development we were discussing was yet another, it turned out to be the third extensive ground search in the area surrounding the children's home. This search was going to be a little bit different because it was targeted specifically on an area called the Pipeline Trail, which is the area in which what was thought to possibly be a child's boot print was found during the early days of the search. When we spoke in our last episode, we talked about this search being underway at the time of our recording. We can give some updates now on what came of this search. The way I'll do it, I'm just going to play a short news clip that covers the search and gives us a bit of a look at what was going on there.
Ground search and rescue volunteers once again backcombing the dense forest and expanding beyond the initial search zone. Search manager Amy Hansen says about 75 volunteers were in the woods on Saturday in an area where a boot print was located in an earlier search. Hansen says the conditions are challenging.
No, they were extending into newer areas that haven't been searched and finishing off and cleaning up some areas. The boot print was on the pipeline, which is why we're extending our search efforts down the pipeline. We don't know for sure it was from the children, but it's the only real thing we've had to go on thus far, so we're just kind of investigating that further. These people have been out weekend after weekend and day after day putting themselves through this. The families are understanding and letting them come out, and we're actually starting to see some people that just physically and emotionally can't return to the search at this point.
RCMP say the investigation remains active and they urge anyone with information on the children's whereabouts to bring it forward.
So a lot to talk about there, but what we just listened to was a report being made kind of while the search was underway. We do know now, as a result of the head of the search and rescue giving some statements to media the Monday after that search ended, is that apparently no new information was gained from this third and up until this point final large-scale ground search.
If they had gone into the woods, how could they have gone that far that they haven't found anything yet? Like, we'd have something to go off of. This is just so bizarre.
You would think. It seems like the big piece of evidence that this whole search is rallying around is what may or may not even be a boot print related to this case. In that clip we heard ourselves, it's like that's all we have to go on at this point. So as far as these weeks of ground searching with huge crews, all they found so far is this one quote unquote boot print. And that is pretty disappointing. If you're one of the people, if you're one of the volunteers giving up your weekends for the search, like everyone wants to help missing children, but after weeks of it, when you find nothing, there has to be a point where you're just like, I just cannot do this anymore.
Well, and I'm sure it's physical and emotional.
Yeah.
It's so discouraging to come this far and still be at square one, essentially.
Yeah. And I guess I didn't really think about the fact either that so many of the searchers and members of the search and rescue are volunteers. That explains why so many of these searches are happening on the weekends. But also, when you look at the past reports week over week that we've been discussing this, they're always giving a number of searchers. Initially, there was 150 of them. In this clip we just heard, it was something like 70. And I just wonder if they're having their crew drop off. I think either way, I'm sure we probably both agree is that if something was there to find, they would have found it by now. So I think the ground search is reducing in importance to the other types of investigative techniques that we're going to hear about tonight. This ground search we just heard discussed in that prior news clip, that was 2 weeks ago. We haven't heard another one since, but we have heard a lot about police interviews, different police major crime units and related units being involved in it, polygraph testing we've talked about last week. There's a lot more updates related to that side of the investigation. But before we get to that, one other thing I want to talk about, there was a vigil planned by a community group. It's actually it was a candlelight vigil that was hosted, planned, and organized by a Facebook group that's committed to advocating for Jack and Lilly. The group itself, the Facebook group itself, is called Lilly and Jack Updates. Let's bring them home. They started this just as like a Facebook thing, and we should all go there, go to the police station, light some candles, and just show our solidarity and support for Lilly and Jack and the people searching for them. I just want to play a short news clip about the vigil, and then I can give a bit of information because I had a chance to get on the phone with the person who created the Facebook as well as organized this vigil. But let's just listen to a short video presentation about it.
Lilly and Jack Sullivan, still missing?
Reading the words from a page he was handed at a vigil for his missing stepchildren, 6-year-old Lilly and 4-year-old Jack Sullivan, Daniel Martell says it brought out a lot of emotions.
They had some RCMP speakers and people from the community, and there was even one guy who drove all the way from Sheet Harbor to come up and show his respect, so I appreciate that.
At the vigil, Martell didn't know what to expect, but people came. Strangers stood silent, held candles, and left messages.
What else can you do? It's a way they can show their emotion and as best they can, and that we haven't forgotten.
The children's mother didn't attend the vigil. Martell says the grief has been overwhelming, and online speculation hasn't helped, especially for their daughter that still lives with her.
Put your focus outward around Malaya and toward the kids. Don't attack Malaya, because her mental health is you know, it's going to be reflected on our daughter, so I don't want anyone attacking Madelayne anymore.
The county's warden says he understands a vigil may seem premature to some, but it's a sign of how deeply the community cares.
I always thought that perhaps it was a little early and perhaps it would show that we were sort of accepting the inevitable and maybe we have to. But I think there was still hope here. I don't think they were giving up.
The RCMP is still investigating this as a missing persons case and is encouraging anyone with information to reach out.
So we heard a lot there about the vigil, and of course we're hearing from the children's stepfather, Daniel Martell, who had some really interesting things to say about the children's mother, Madelayne. Let's start with that. This is the first time I've really heard the stepfather, Daniel Martell, defend Madelayne and all but ask people online to leave her alone. He makes a good case for that. He says, like, if I'm worried about her mental health and people attacking her online will only further affect her mental health, which will then in turn affect my daughter that I share with Madelayne, because they do have a child together.
Right.
But referring to her mental health just makes me question, is he referring to, like, you know, the trauma of having two missing children, or is there something else that was going on before this related to mental illness, mental health?
It could be both.
Mm-hmm.
Like two things can be true at the same time. I think if either one of them had something to do with Lilly and Jack's disappearance, they would have sold each other out by now.
Mm-hmm. Either something to do with it or guilty knowledge about what may have happened.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I couldn't imagine what she's going through. Like him too, but imagine losing not one of your children, but two. And not knowing.
In this horribly public way with people online, you know, thinking you're involved in it. You know, Daniel puts himself as a target, so he's getting a lot of accusations hurled towards him, but at least he's there kind of putting himself out and defending himself to an extent. She, you know, I can't put myself in her headspace, but it just seems like she's kind of cowered into her family and her community, and has largely, you know, disappeared from this. I don't know how I would react or what's normal. It's interesting, the difference between the two of them and how they're responding. In this terms of this vigil, Daniel, as we heard in that news clip, he attended. He lit a little lantern. As far as I can tell, he didn't give any kind of speech or anything like that, but he was social with people there, you know, shaking hands, giving hugs, and, you know, thanking people for attending, which is nice. The two of us have talked a lot about the negative side of social media and the harm that can do to people, the harm that online discussion can do to people in real life situations. I think this is kind of an example of the good that can come out of that. This Facebook group in particular, which is called Lilly and Jack Updates, Let's Bring Them Home, is a group that specifically excludes kind of the more toxic, nonsensical slander, accusation sort of stuff. And it seems focused on, again, advocacy and organizing and planning things like this. And just by getting a crowd of people together outside of the police station, getting the news to show up, having it be this kind of somber sort of respectful moment, like I think that just helps express the public pressure that is being put on the police. And I support that sort of thing.
Oh, totally. But I just, and like I've mentioned, I hate to be repetitive, but we've mentioned in previous episodes that, you know, maybe the police know more than they're sharing with the public, and they're absolutely entitled to do that.
Let's hope they do.
Mm-hmm. But, you know, public pressure can only go so far when you've essentially hit a wall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, where else do you go after you've exhausted every avenue?
Yeah, but there's a lot of avenues that they're going down. So I think, you know, I've heard people refer to this case as like it's a cold case. It's going cold. I think this case is wide open and on fire behind the scenes. But
I hope so.
No one is going to tell us that. We'll get a glimpse of it as we go when we start hearing about a recent press release from the RCMP that gives some data on how many people they've interviewed and such. I think that'll show that it's not by any means a cold case. But just one last thing about the vigil. I did get a chance to speak with the organizer and planner of the vigil. Her name is Lana. She was very generous with her time, so I thank her for telling me all about the vigil, the planning of it, and I tip my hat to people like her who use the power of social media for public good. So thank you for your time, Lana, and thank you for organizing a vigil. You know, these children, I don't think anyone wants to admit that they're deceased, and whether or not they are, recognizing the 1 month anniversary, I think, is important for a story that has captured the attention of the entire province, if not country. It's, you know, it took someone to do it, and it was a moderator of a Facebook group. So cheers to you.
And it's not just our country either. It's international.
Absolutely. Well, we've talked a bit about an upcoming RCMP press release and some information about the investigation. Let's take our first ad break, and when we get back, we'll get into that. And it's really going to get interesting from here out. One criticism I've seen levied against the law enforcement and the investigators is that they're not revealing enough to the public. You've just talked about this before our break, is, you know, there's a lot going on behind the scenes that the public isn't going to know about until there's been like an arrest made or a major discovery or things are revealed in court. All that to say, I think the RCMP has been keeping open lines of communication with the public by way of press conferences and press releases. It's almost weekly they've released at least some statement giving updates to the scope and status of the different investigative techniques and teams that are being deployed to the search for Lilly and Jack Sullivan. On June 11th, just 3 days ago prior to our recording, the RCMP released yet another press release. And this one really gave a bird's eye view of what they've been up to. Rather than read the press release, I'm going to play a short global news report that summarizes what the release shared, and then we can talk about some individual points of it ourselves.
Several national agencies have joined the investigation for missing Pictou County siblings Jack and Lilly Sullivan. The RCMP says more than 11 RCMP units are working the case, including the Major Crime Unit, Behavioral Sciences Group, and Criminal Analysis Service. The National Centre for Missing Persons and the Canadian Centre for Child Protection have also joined the investigation. Despite several extensive searches, a review of hours of video footage, and interviews with 54 people, including polygraph tests, the children remain missing. All searches have been around the children's home and have included septic systems, wells, mine shafts, and culverts. Based on the evidence, police say no new search areas have been identified.
When you hear a news clip like that, you really see the value of a press release, because they basically just summarized the RCMP's press release and shared it as if it was like a kind of like a news update. But it gives a lot of good information. And I think it's when you're hearing them rattle off, you know, the different RCMP units and organizations that are involved, when it's in a list, it just kind of goes in one ear out the other to an extent. But when you actually think of the amount of people and teams that are working on this from all these different angles, it's really quite shocking how much attention this has been given. We have a major crimes unit investigating, a behavioral science team. We've mentions of polygraphs. There's a team I've never even heard of that was called like the Truth Verification Team. And I think they're in some way involved in like analyzing statements, cross-referencing other statements, and referencing polygraph testing and stuff. Like there are these teams I've never even heard of that are working on this story.
Which makes it even more baffling that there's still nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at this point, 54 people interviewed. We've tried to estimate or try to come up with some ideas of who these people could be, from family to neighbors to professionals to teachers and such. 54 is a big number. We know at least one has had a polygraph because the children's stepfather, Daniel Martell, spoke about it on the news, and I think we talked about that in our prior episode. We are going to hear more about it because Daniel did give more information about his polygraph. But the RCMP using polygraphs as a tool, again, it just raises up the heat in some of these interviews / interrogations, which some of the interviews have probably turned into by this point. We've heard 488 tips were received For a case in a rural area, that's a lot of ideas.
But like, imagine some of the time wasting tips they've received.
Yeah, but maybe you want it. But for all the time wasting tips, there may be one that makes it happen. It's hard. Like I want to criticize some of the nonsense, but at the same time, it's like,
yeah,
someone has good information. I think I'm sure the police have a pretty good idea. You get a call from someone from another, there's some person from the U.S. who's calling because they read something on Facebook.
We'll look into how many of those tips were like verbatim Facebook comments?
Yeah.
Oh, talk to the mother. They're like, yeah, because we haven't done that.
Yeah.
Click.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of that. One other thing that was said in the press release is that the RCMP has been granted numerous judicial authorizations to seize and examine materials and devices that may provide information useful to the investigation. So I think that's a roundabout way to say we got warrants and took a bunch of people's phones and computers.
Oh, absolutely. That's what I read too. That's what I read between the lines.
Yeah, that's the part of the investigation that I think would be, whether this case or any case, I think that'd be really interesting. The amount of data and information you can get from somebody's phone, be it the GPS activity as where they are, the text messages, the app usage, like just seeing when they're using their phone, what they're using it for, who they're communicating with.
Google search history.
All that stuff.
Yeah.
And if you could get the phone, all the information from the phones of, say, the 10 people closest to these children's lives, I feel like you'd be well on your way to solving the case.
You'd think. And you know what? Maybe they are. And because it is still an open investigation, there is not one open investigation ever in history that they keep the public updated as they find stuff out.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
They're live streaming the interrogation
Exactly.
on their YouTube channel.
God.
Yeah, and then they take a break in the middle of the interrogation to eat HelloFresh meal kits. That's I think that's what the world some people think this is. It's no.
Yes.
The RCMP are going to keep their cards as close to their chest as possible until after the charges are laid. If there are charges, that's when we're going to hear about it.
They're dotting their I's and crossing their T's.
Certainly. But these press releases, these are a good thing. It's keeping the public informed. It's keeping the media informed. And it's just keeping the lines of communication open to the extent that's reasonable. It would be unreasonable for the RCMP to tell us exactly what they think, what strategies they're employing, who they're talking to. That's not the way this works. But that said, we can learn a little bit about what the RCMP is doing when people that the RCMP are doing it to and with begin to talk. And that brings us to the next update. We heard in our prior episode about Daniel Martell, the children's stepfather, asking for, if not begging for, a polygraph. He shared that the polygraph was done, and he also said, I can't reveal the results of it, but let's just say it was good in my favor, which you and I used our powers of investigative journalism to maybe mean that he passed, quote unquote, passed the examination. But we can now learn a little bit more about it, because when this RCMP press release came out on June 11th, all the media organizations were reporting on it, and they all found their own way to report on it. Some just read the press release, like the clip we just heard, and some took a step further and started to talk to people about some of the things the RCMP said. One of those groups, CTV News, they spoke to Daniel Martell about the use of polygraph testing, and he was able to give a bit of information about exactly what questions they were asking. And that's something that was interesting to us last week. We were like, I wonder, what were they saying? What were they asking him about? Let's find out right now. Here comes Daniel Martell giving a glimpse behind the curtain into the polygraph test.
Jack and Lilly's stepfather says he was the first to volunteer for a polygraph, hopeful it would help the search and ease public speculation.
I know it would be a big help in the case and kind of narrow down maybe some of the speculations and just provide more evidence.
Daniel Martell says during the polygraph test, he was asked several things, including whether or not he was involved in the disappearance of the children. He says both his cell phone and that of his estranged wife were confiscated and searched by investigators. This and weeks of interviews, there still hasn't been a major break in the case. And for their stepfather, the silence inside the once busy home is deafening.
Going from a family of 7 to just me, I mean, I have nothing but time to just think.
RCMP insists this is still very much an active investigation. They're reviewing surveillance footage and following digital evidence. But the emotional toll has already left its mark on Martell, including the loss of custody of his daughter, Meadow.
I haven't even got to see my own kids, not even Meadow yet. But I'm still hopeful. I have supervised visits coming up that are granted by CPS.
The children's stepfather says he's grateful to the investigators and to people who continue to share tips, even if none have yet led to finding Jack and Lilly. Until then, over a month later, the family continues to remain hopeful that the children will return home safe.
There's a lot said there because we both get a bit of information on the polygraph. We hear that his phone and Malaya's phones and devices were taken. And then we also hear an update about, well, he said her name, Meadow. Meadow is the child that Daniel and Malaya have together, the baby that they were laying in bed with the morning that the children are alleged to have likely wandered off. I was surprised to hear he hasn't even seen his daughter, Meadow, since this all happened. As far as I can tell, CPS, which is Child Protective Service, basically swooped in and saw to it that she was out of the picture until they could figure out, I guess, what was going on. But I'm surprised he hasn't seen her yet.
Well, and he also said going from a family of 7 to just him, Lilly, Jack, Meadow, him, and Malaya are 5.
Yeah,
So does he
and
have 2 other kids from a previous relationship?
That's right. He has 2 from a prior relationship. So that is, and they're living in like a trailer. That's like 7 people in that trailer. That's a lot of people because that's not a big house.
Right.
The silence in there must be deafening.
I was just going to say that. You took the thought right out of my head.
Well, I just hope he doesn't go on the internet at night and read what people are saying about him.
I would not be going on the internet at all because that's just, I wouldn't be able to process that.
And the news refers to her, Malaya, as his estranged wife. I don't know if they were married, but I guess common law.
Yeah,
that whole
to the
thing,
government they were.
To the government, it was wife. But it's like as an outsider looking in, every bit of it sounds so suspicious. I think there's these missing children, his estranged wife. Like these elements to the story just sound so bad.
It's a terrible series of events that's happened since Lilly and Jack went missing. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's so bleak.
Mm-hmm. Here's our last thing. I have one other news clip that I'll want to play, and this is what we'll go out on. We heard from retired Halifax police officer and former major crime staff sergeant Jim Hoskins in our prior episode. He speaks to Global News a lot as kind of just like a policing investigative expert. He spoke to Global News in the context of the June 11th RCMP press release, but he makes it pretty clear that he believes in his heart of hearts and with all of his knowledge and experience behind him that this is no longer an investigation into children who wandered off and is likely an investigation criminal in nature. I want to play the clip of his interview with Global because I think this just sums it up so nicely as far as what the future of this investigation is and probably what the outcome is going to eventually be.
If this is not a criminal investigation now, I'd be totally surprised.
On Wednesday, the RCMP in Nova Scotia said many RCMP units, including major crime, are involved in the investigation, along with the National Center for Missing Persons. Police say they formally interviewed 54 people in their search, and this former Halifax regional police officer doesn't take that lightly.
They're out there, and the only way they're going to see or get results in this is to be out there talking to people, looking at videos, looking at topography and what have you and so on. They're not in offices doing this by a laptop. Let's put it that way.
In an update this week, the RCMP say they've collected hundreds of hours of video from areas surrounding Lansdowne Station between April 28th and May 2nd, when the kids went missing, and have received nearly 500 tips from the public. Police say they've searched every aspect of the family's home and received authorization to seize and examine devices.
They'll go on the balance of probabilities based on the area that we fully searched with a lot of people. We can't find any evidence, be it a backpack, a shoe, or whatever. We can't find the kids. If you can't find them, that somebody has to say enough is enough right now for searching those areas. So now we move to where? There's only one other option. A nefarious take to this. In other words, a criminal type thing. That's only my personal opinion.
Police say they've used polygraph tests in some interviews. This former polygraph examiner south of the border says the test is used to monitor how a person's nervous system responds to certain questions.
If somebody is successful in the test, then not that they're being eliminated, but they'll spend more time on people that are not successful. Not passing the test doesn't mean you're guilty or you're involved. It simply means that there's some issue there, maybe some knowledge, guilty knowledge.
Moriello says he's seen people pass tests who were later proven guilty. More than 160 search and rescue volunteers have scoured through the densely wooded area surrounding the children's home, but only a small boot print was found. Police continue to refer to the case as a missing persons investigation.
They're covering it all, everything they can. And you only do that in depth when there's a criminal investigation with major crime on scene. They're not there just because they're major crime. They're there to do their major crime work.
I think he hits the nail on the head. Major crime's not there just because they're major crimes and they're involved. They're there to do major crime work.
Right.
And I wonder if there will be a point where the RCMP press conference says this is now being treated as a criminal investigation. I've seen them do that in other cases. Like, that is something that they may announce at some point. That would be really interesting, because up until now, they will talk about polygraphs and tips and and interviews, but it's always the disappearance of Jack and Lilly, who wandered away from their home on April 2nd. At what point is it they change at least the context of their messaging with the public?
Yeah, I don't know. And maybe internally they already have. They just haven't said that yet. Yeah, I don't know. It's see, the more we find out, or the more we don't find out, makes me wonder if this is like a 1% stranger abduction.
At this point, anything is possible. And it wouldn't be 1%. It would be even less than 1% for a stranger abduction. For it to be two kids, rural Nova Scotia, on a Friday morning, right outside of their home, where their parents are sleeping in, it would be such a strike of lightning, miracle of tragedy for that to be the case. But something happened, and it's I think you said, I wonder if behind the scenes, if the police are referring to it that way. I'm sure they must be.
They have to.
In which world would police be soliciting tips in a case where children wandered off? Why would there be tips? Like, did you see them or not?
Well,
we don't need a tip. We need to know where they are.
Exactly. It's, yeah. Like I said, I hate to be so repetitive, but there's something going on behind the scenes. And I hope they're close. But they know more than we do. Yeah,
the writing is on the wall that the RCMP are pursuing this behind, maybe not directly in their messaging. They're pursuing it as being criminal and nefarious in nature. And it seems like their interviews, they would be starting with people closest to the children and working their way out. I'm sure they have a very good idea of what's happening and what's happened. They've had several or multiple interviews bordering on interrogations with people very close at this point, I'm sure. I bet you Daniel and Madelayne have spoke to RCMP multiple times and are in every detail of the story that they've shared is being triple checked. It is being cross-referenced with other statements. The children's biological father, he, as far as I know, I've learned that he's been in with the RCMP multiple times as well, which I think is really interesting. We've heard nothing about him in the media. But of course, the children's last name is Sullivan. The mother is Brooks Murray is her last name. Daniel Martell, he's the stepfather, different last name. The Sullivan family has been silent, at least in terms of the media coverage. And I think that's something that's also making a lot of people question it. You know, where is the dad?
Right. But
The biological dad?
they are entitled to stay as silent as they want to.
As long as they talk to police.
Oh, and they have. Like,
Mhm.
you're crazy if you don't think that they haven't. The puzzle's coming together behind the scenes.
So give me your estimate. Last time we talked, I said 2 weeks. I'm going to say now, I'm giving it, this is going to be solved this summer. That's what I will say.
Okay, maybe I'm just really, what word am I looking for here? I hope it's within the next week.
Really?
I think the puzzle's coming together and just all of a sudden they'll unveil it and be like, we figured it out.
Yeah. Whatever the answer is, it is going to be so shocking when the public learns.
Oh, absolutely. It'll be crazy because they haven't found them in the woods. Something weird went on.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Anything other than them being found in the woods is the stuff of a Netflix series.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we'll put a bow on our 6th episode discussing the 5th
episode.
Yes,
Good
it
grief.
is. So, yeah, and this episode we've discussed the 5th and 6th week of the children's disappearance and the search for them. I can only imagine what the updates will be this week. There will be something, and I'm also hoping to get in touch with some people close to the story as well. And so if anyone close to the children's life or families or anyone with knowledge of the search or investigation, if you want to reach out to me, I would love to talk to you either anonymously or on the record. I can be reached at nighttimepodcast@gmail.com. With all that said, Madelayne Klein, let's put a bow on this.
Until hopefully next week will be our last episode. I'm putting that out into the universe.
Yeah, where we share that the children were found safe, and that's what we're all hoping for.
Could you imagine if they turned up alive?
That is the ultimate end to this. Is that blank situation led to the kids still being alive, and they're found. That would be such a miracle. It's a miracle of tragedy that led to this situation, a regular miracle to resolve it. Oh my God, that would be amazing.
Yeah. And that's why I am still so hopeful for that outcome, because nothing in this case makes sense as is. So why can't the impossible happen?
The idea of a storybook ending, if this was a book, that would be the ending.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of Nighttime. Now, before I end here, I want to send positive vibes to everyone affected by this case and share a sincere thank you to everyone searching for Jack and Lilly. This is truly a nightmare scenario, and I think everyone out there feels the same way as I. When kids go missing, everything else takes second priority. Now, with that said, I'm going to start wrapping up this episode, but before we part, I have some thanks to give out. First, a big thanks to Madelayne for joining us for this episode. A thanks to Lana for telling us about the vigil. A thanks to Monty Data, who contributes the music for this show, and Linz from the Dystopian Simulation podcast, who provides my intro and outro voiceovers. And then lastly, but most importantly, a massive thank you to everyone who's listening to Nighttime. Without your interest and your support, this show would be as pointless as it would be impossible. Now, on the topic of support, let me thank the newest subscribers to the premium feed, Jamie, Anne, and Lydia. We appreciate you. And for anyone else who'd like to support the show, you can help us out here in a variety of ways. First of all, a premium feed subscription costs just a couple bucks a month, and that money funds the creation of the show. But the premium feed will also give you episodes of the show ad-free, 2 days early, and give you access to a back catalog of episodes. If that sounds like something you're interested in, you can go premium at nighttimepodcast.com/subscribe. And even if you don't want to go premium, you could still support the show by sharing this episode on social media, telling all your like-minded friends why they should listen. Your support is very much appreciated. And before we go, if anyone out there has any story ideas, wants to give feedback on the episode, or would like to submit a question or comment, you can do all that and more at nighttimepodcast.com/contact. I look forward to hearing from you. But until then, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.